second highest pass with paved road in Europe, 2,758 meters altitude, 88 hairpin turns, and a Dacia Bigster hybrid. It turned into one of the most interesting data sets I've collected so far. On my way back from Italy to Romania, I mentioned in the last episode, I made a small detour. Instead of taking the direct route, I went through Passo dello Stelvio, one of the most iconic mountain passes in the Alps and in Europe. The route, starting point Bormio at 1000 meters, up to the pass at 2758 meters, then down to Prato allo Stelvio at 934 meters. Both starting and ending points had around 17 degrees. 54.8 kilometers in total. The OBD showing 1796 meters of climbing and 1862 meters in descent. This detour added roughly 260 kilometers to my overall journey, which covered 1566 kilometers over the 2 days. As always, the OBD was running the entire time, every second a data point, and this is what came out. The climb to 1796 meters was from Bormio to the top. It took 37 minutes and covered 24.3 kilometers. Fuel consumed 3.2 liters at a little bit over 13 liters per 100 kilometers. That is a little bit more than 21 UK miles per gallon. That's nearly 2 times the normal highway consumption, which is expected. You're pushing an 1.5 tons brick hybrid SUV up nearly 1800 meters of altitude. The battery started the climb at 95.3% charge, and by the top it had dropped to 39%, resulting in 56% discharge used to assist the engine. These are the initial and final values. Again, all normal. What's more interesting is how the system managed it, because it never let it run flat. Every hairpin bend, every brief flat section, the engine switched to charging mode. The battery oscillated constantly between 20 and 45%, never dropping below that floor. Here are the operating modes during the ascent. Regen mode, where petrol engine was propelling, 45.6% of climbing in time. On bends and flat sections, the engine was charging the battery even while going uphill. Second most use is 37.7%, both motors pushing simultaneously with electric bursts up to 43.3 kW. Pure EV only 6.1%. Engine off, fully electric. Petrol only 3%. The rest of the time, about 7.6% was for coasting, regen only, or stopped. Engine oil peaked at 97 degrees Celsius. Engine coolant at 91 degrees. Both within normal operating ranges, but the highest I've recorded on this car, especially the engine oil. Battery temperature stayed remarkably cool, maximum 33 degrees Celsius during the climb. The thin, cold air kept the pack well within range. At around 2400 meters, on a straight, open section, I briefly tested the power push to 111 kilometers per hour. Nothing crazy, but the car had no hesitation, no drop in response, so the car handled it cleanly. I stopped at the top for the lunch. 39 minutes parked at 2796 meters altitude. The data shows what happened while I was eating. Engine oil dropped to 71 degrees, engine coolant dropped to 68 degrees, battery temperature to 20 degrees, so everything was cooling down quietly. Just the mountain air doing its job at 4 degrees Celsius. The descent. This is where it gets really interesting. 30.5 kilometers and 1862 meters of descent in 53 minutes. Total fuel burned only 0.13 liters at 0.42 liters per 100 kilometers. The descent was almost free. The car recovered energy the entire way down, through regenerative braking. Battery state of charge jumped from 60% at the top to 100% within the first 4 kilometers of descent. A 2000-meter drop in altitude was enough to fill the battery. When the battery hit 100%, the system started using the engine to absorb the energy instead of continuously charging the battery. Fuel burned during that phase is very low, only 0.004 liters. Regen energy covered on descent was 1.24 kilowatt-hour, but a lot more is lost. Engine oil temperature went down to 60 degrees Celsius. The coolant went from 68 to 56, as the engine was barely involved in propelling the car. Here are the overall Stelvio numbers. The 6.07 liters per 100 kilometers or 46.54 miles per gallon for the full crossing, including one of the most demanding climbs on public roads in Europe. I think that is impressive. Over those 2 days, the car climbed a total of over 9,000 meters of altitude. Considering all those numbers, the overall fuel consumption was 4.77 liters per 100 kilometers for the 2-day trip. That number tells you the same story as until now. The system is very efficient. Let me share a little bit more about the engine braking and the brake management on the descent. For the entire descent section, I switched to B mode. For the first 4 kilometers, it worked perfectly. Strong regenerative braking, barely touching the brake pedal. But the moment the battery hit 100%, the engine braking almost disappeared. The system had nowhere to store the recovery energy, so it stopped recovering it. I ran a quick test, switching back and forth between D and B mode. What I found, even with a full battery, B mode still offers a slight engine braking, but not enough to descend 1,800 meters safely without hitting the brakes. So I used a technique I've been applying for years, first learned on a 3.5-ton camper van. The first time I drove that van down a mountain, I got the brakes red hot, like a rally car. I genuinely thought I was going to set the vehicle on fire. First and last time that happened. Since then, I've refined the approach. When the descent is manageable and the car naturally slows down from engine braking, I let it flow. Light throttle only if needed to keep the steady pace. When the descent steepens and engine braking isn't enough, I take my foot completely off the accelerator. I let the car roll freely after each bend. If the speed builds too much before the next corner, I brake decisively, then release and let the car roll again. No continuous brake pressure, no riding the pedal. At each corner, I brake. That's unavoidable. But immediately after, I release and let the car coast. This gives the brakes time to cool between applications. They still heat up. That's inevitable on a descent like this. But they cool between bends and everything stayed within normal parameters. Interestingly, I've noticed the same brake heating on diesel. The hybrid doesn't seem any different in that regard using this technique. What I usually avoid: ACC or active cruise control on the descent. The system accelerates between corners where you shouldn't, then constantly hits the mechanical brake when speed builds. That's exactly what you don't want. Constant light brake pressure to hold a fixed slow speed, that's the fastest way to overheat the discs. And if the brakes get very hot, never spray water on them. Thermal shocks can damage the discs permanently. Also, avoid parking stationary with extremely hot brakes. If they cool while clamped, you risk the pads bonding with the discs. What I'd like to try eventually, a brake temperature sensor on a proper comparison test between a diesel and the Bigster hybrid using this technique on the same descent to see if there is actually a measurable difference. More on that when I get to it. The Stelvio crossing gave me data I couldn't imagine. What stands out? The hybrid system never struggled. It's true, I hadn't a spirited driving style, but a normal one, not pushing it to its limit. On the climbing, only 3% of it was on a petrol engine. That makes you not feel any lack of power. On other climbing occasions, with longer, straight and high-speed section, I did felt a lack of power when the battery is empty. But that's something I'll cover in a different episode, as it's a different climbing approach compared to the Stelvio Pass. The descent was essentially free. Temperature stayed controlled, battery never overheated, and the engine stayed within normal range even even at peak demand. And the overall efficiency of the full Italy-Romania trip, 4.77 liters per 100 kilometers, including all these, is a number worth remembering. This is what the platform I'm building is for, not just trip reports, but moments like this where you can actually see how the system works. This week I'll be visiting the service center for the 40,000 kilometers oil change. So the next episode will cover that and any potential news, discussions with the technicians or software updates. Drive safe and I'll see you in the next one.